some of you watching this program say, listen, this stuff, they're just games. Dungeons & Dragons, they're just games. These rock musicians, it's just a song, it's games. The cartoons, they're just sort of make-believe. Are they really things like demons? Well, the answer is you better believe it.
Hi guys, Harbs and Narbs here. Welcome to the final part in the series of the history of the Forgotten Realms within Dungeons & Dragons. Today we will be talking about the current 5th edition. Okay, let's go. 5th edition's development was announced in January 2012 and it was then known as D&D Next. Not that anyone had much hope for the new edition, as we can see from this article in Wired in 2012, which is altogether disparaging of Wizards of the Coast and how they handled 4th edition. The article ends with the following. Where they need to start is with rebuilding the bonds of trust with their fans, through open communication and an honest effort to make a great open sourced game, rather than one built strictly based on corporate profit margins. If they were to do that, I think it would be an immense step in the right direction, and perhaps begin to bring all of the disparate D&D players back into the fold. Well, that's exactly what Wizards did, and it was developed through the use of an open playtest in May 2012, all the way through to late 2013. This was in stark contrast to other editions which had not done these type of open playtests.
Some of our viewers would like to know a little bit more.
Okay, great. Yes, we are in the process of playtesting the next iteration of Dungeons & Dragons. We're running a huge open playtest at this time. For anybody who may not have signed up to be officially involved in it, it's not too late. So we would encourage anybody who's not in the playtest to go to our website and sign up. But we've been conducting this for a while. It's going to be a long process. It's very important for us at this time to get the core rules right. Our goal is to provide a simplified, streamlined core rule system that has a low barrier to entry but scalability, so that people can add the complexity that they want and the flexibility to play to the play style that they prefer.
However, there was a new threat on the horizon, and Pathfinder, which was published in 2009 by Paizo Publishing, was gaining some serious ground in the tabletop role-playing market, outselling D&D from 2011 to 2014. But these statistics have been pulled from the website ICV2.com, which have based the sales on interviews with retailers, distributors and manufacturers, so it's not exactly a fantastic source, but it does illustrate how successful Pathfinder was anyway. Given that D&D had dominated for so many years, a type of survey run like this would have definitely always had Wizards out on top in the past. Pathfinder used the D20 system made available by Wizards of the Coast during 3rd edition, and many players who felt like 4th edition D&D was not their type of game moved over to Pathfinder, and some even coined it 3.75 edition, due to some changes that Paizo had made to 3.5 edition. Apparently these rule changes helped to bring even more balance to the game. So the public playtesting had helped rectify many of 4th edition's mistakes, and Wizards of the Coast were hoping to take the market back into their hands, and they succeeded. In fact, although there are many great tabletop role-playing games out today, none are as vehemently popular in the Western world as Dungeons & Dragons. But why has 5th edition caused D&D to resurge in popularity in a manner which hasn't been seen before? In fact, D&D has well and truly come out of the basement into a mainstream hobby, and I think it's down to many factors, one of which includes the shows like Critical Role, that no matter your feelings on them have brought D&D out to the masses somewhat. They get a lot of unnecessary beef online from a small minority of rule lawyers or people who just seem generally angry at them, but they're just a bunch of friends playing D&D and they've done a lot for the hobby. I'd like to share my opinion on watching people play D&D, and that's that I don't like it. I don't have anything against streamers who play D&D online. As I said before, I think Critical Role, who I'm using as the primary example, even if there were others that came before them, are great for what they've done for D&D. And if people enjoy watching it, then that's fantastic. But I ultimately find it boring watching people play Dungeons & Dragons, even if some of my friends have tried to convince me to get into it. I just can't seem to get through a whole episode. I imagine I'm not alone in this, and so what are some other reasons that 5th edition has brought so many people into the hobby? Well, in part, the rules got easier to follow from previous editions. One rule which I particularly love about 5th edition is advantage and disadvantage. It's a fantastic way to give someone a boost or hindrance based on possible external factors or their own skills, and it works very well. And the main thing, it's quite simple, and overall play was more streamlined. Although I would say that it could be argued that combat has been simplified too much, especially in terms of the capabilities of 5th edition monsters. Wizards also worked hard to bring in new players, releasing a starter set which made the game accessible in a way that it never was before. The basic rules of the game were made free, and according to Jeremy Crawford from Wizards of the Coast, we decided that if there's someone who comes to a D&D group and wants to try out our game, there should be no barrier to that. I would also say that more mainstream fantasy also had an effect. People yearned to run their own adventure after seeing the likes of Game of Thrones, Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, and just a general increase in nerd pop culture that never existed in the 80s, 90s and early 2000s. Overall, I love 5th edition, and I think a lot of others do too, not just for the game itself but also for the community that it has created. So, where is the Forgotten Realms in 5th edition? Well, the current year is around 1495 DR. Descent into Avernus was set in 1495 DR, and although it's now not the most recent major campaign, it is the furthest along in the realm years, as the recently released Rime of the Frost Maiden is set in 1489 DR. 5th edition started technically with the Lost Mines of Phandelver, which was a starter set for new players of the game. But the first HANDBOOK adventures were the Tyranny of Dragons storyline, which included the adventures Hoard of the Dragon Queen and The Rise of Tiamat, set in the 1480s. The 5th edition is set mainly after the Second Sundering, where AO reforged the Tablets of Fate that were destroyed during the Time of Troubles. A series of 6 novels known as the Sundering series, and written by a variety of authors, 2 of which include Ed Greenwood and R.A. Salvatore. Each novel focuses on the Second Sundering from the perspective of a famous character in the realms. A lot of things happen within the Second Sundering, but the main things that you should be concerned with is that the mess that was created during the Spell Plague was fixed. And going further back, the gods that had their portfolios taken away from them during the Time of Troubles were restored to their respective pantheons. There can be no doubt as to the real reason for the Sundering, as we can see at a seminar called Candlekeep Presents 25 Years of the Forgotten Realms during Gen Con in 2012, where it is stated the Sundering was effectively made to restore the realms as the setting all fans knew and loved. In fact, in the Dragon Talk podcast in 2016, Christopher Perkins said the following.
So the spirit of the Sundering was that we wanted to bring back into the realms things that had been lost over time. Several of the gods had disappeared or been killed off or whatnot. And in sort of brainstorming the idea of AO basically rewriting the Tablets of Fate and these 2 worlds of Abir and Toril sort of separating, and the return of Mistra and the reconstruction of the Weave, that the Sundering is really a statement about where we want to take the realms going forward, which is the gods are around, but at the end of the Sundering, they withdraw from the world to an extent, and basically usher in what could be considered an age of mortals.
5th edition never had a Forgotten Realms campaign setting guide. I suppose the closest we have got to one so far is the Sword Coast Adventurers Guide. We can also see much of what is happening in the Forgotten Realms through the various adventures that were released, as well as the adventures released during the open playtest, like Murder in Baldur's Gate, which saw the return of Baal, Lord of Murder, after Vikang and Abdeladrian killed each other in Baldur's Gate in 1482 DR, which really marked the beginning of the Second Sundering. Their essence of Baal was released, and so the god of murder was restored to his place in the pantheon. This is an example of many things that were restored in normal adventures. Interestingly, and if you played Baldur's Gate 2, we can actually come across Vikang in Vitari's pub in Trademeat.
Very well. Hi, friend.
The following gods were restored during the Second Sundering: Mask, Helm, Lathander, Mistra, Merkel, Tyr, Azuth, all of the lost drow gods, and the Mulhorandi pantheon. Gods like Bane and Baal actually restored themselves without the interference of Ao, having already put things in place in case of their demise. Whilst Ao reforged the Tablets of Fate, Toril was gripped by constant wars from 1482 to 1487 DR, and it was a period of huge strife as many gods feared losing their power. As 1487 came to a close, the Second Sundering finished when Mistra returned. The Weave was restored, and Abir and Toril were completely separated once more. A lot happened in the years from 1482 to 1487, hence why there are 6 novels on the matter. But as Christopher Perkins said, 5th edition is ultimately the age of mortals, and in fact in 1488 DR, prayers to all deities went unanswered until 1489, when the gods started to speak to mortals again. However, all deities withdrew their power that they had given their chosen, who had been gifted with special divine abilities during the years of strife in the Second Sundering. According to the Sword Coast's Adventurer's Guide, the gods were no longer silent, but quiet, and in many places new priesthoods arose to interpret the gods' new subtle signs. The Forgotten Realms is still my favourite setting for Dungeons & Dragons, and I feel like it has truly got back on track during 5th edition. We can also see in an interview with Tribality in 2015 that Ed Greenwood, the creator of the Forgotten Realms, feels the same way when he was asked the following: do you like the direction the Forgotten Realms has taken in 5e, going back to a more traditional realms as opposed to the Spellplague realms of D&D 4th edition? In response, he says, yes, the realms getting back on its feet as opposed to magic going wild and gods dying and everything changing and the entire world seemingly being at war, shifts player character adventures from just trying to stay alive to being able to adventure in a setting where there are some precious and beloved people and places to defend, and great new things can be built by bold adventurers. Okay, thanks for watching guys, it's been a pleasure doing this series. My next video will be the 3rd part to my villain series, and if you enjoyed this video then do please give me a like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Bye!